Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe. This is Joe Pasillo, and once more, brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. I just get aggravated. I think a lot of people out there know that there's a lot to get aggravated about. And Joe and I, we're a couple of Italian guys from New Jersey. This guy, Umar Johnson, doctor. Let me be respectful, and I am respectful. Dr. Umar Johnson. He is a psychologist. Okay, he's out of Philadelphia. This argument that he puts forth for reparations, I want to show you this, okay? I'm tired of giving some sort of a justification why I'm opposed to reparations, okay? I have a very simple response, but I want to get into this video, but I have a very simple response. I'm not paying. I don't know what part of that you don't understand. This does not make me culpable for anything. Nothing whatsoever. The only thing I'm guilty of are my own sins, and I'm not answerable to Dr. Umar Johnson for my sins. But yet, because of the color of my skin, for somehow, some way, I have to pay. Or the American government, taking my money, has to pay. So they'll say, well, you're not really culpable, but America is, so America will pay. It's my money, my tax dollars. Listen to this guy. And then we're going to break it down a little bit. Not too long-winded, though.
America has about 10 major exports: gold, oil, water, electricity. We get a 25% cut permanently. This is perpetual.
Okay, here's the first injustice. Okay, you don't get anything permanently. Let's entertain his ideas for just a second. Nothing's permanent. Slavery was finite. In fact, Dr. Johnson, the only place you'll find slavery in the world right now are places where people of color are enslaving other people of color. So the only place slavery exists in the world right now is in amongst people you claim are the oppressed people in the world, because America's not enslaving anybody. That's number one. Number two, you get nothing perpetually, even if you can make an argument, okay, that reparations are due to you, which you cannot, okay? Well, slavery was finite in America. It had an end. Therefore, any reparations would necessarily have to have an end. So that's just illogical right off the bat.
Every time America makes a dollar, we get 25 cents of that dollar as part of the reparations payment. American Africans, 60% of us, make up 10 states. All 10 of the states that represent 60% of us are seaboarding states. We should automatically control the port.
Okay, so you get to control the ports based on the color of your skin, is what you're saying. That means if I'm really good at port organizing, okay, I can't get a job there. Is that correct? Dr. Johnson, you're going to be a racist and discriminate against me if I wanted to go down to the port to work as a longshoreman, let's say, unloading ships coming in and out of Port Newark. Okay. So racist statement right there. Let's move on.
So we know what's coming in, what's going out, and we also get a percentage of that. But here's my biggest issue with reparations. Three. One, psychological damages. I'm not hearing enough of the reparations talking heads discuss enough about the psychological damages.
Let's talk about psychological damages, okay? Anybody will tell you, any sociologist, anybody who has studied this, okay, and talking about the Black experience in America, particularly when it comes to family and religion. When Black Americans, okay, were enslaved, okay, they still had intact families. During Jim Crow, the Black family was strong. Let's say in the 1940s, the 1950s, okay, early 1960s. Pat Buchanan makes it clear Black Americans were more churched than any other group in America. Now, that doesn't mean that Blacks weren't discriminated against, but if you ask me, they were overcoming the discrimination that was being when they were being discriminated against, they were overcoming that, okay? And then what happened? If he wants to talk about psychological damages, what happened? The civil rights legislation of the 1960s that was supposed to usher in a new era for Black Americans. Up to that point, Black Americans who were discriminated against and who were the real descendants of slaves, okay, were overcoming that, were firmly in the middle class, had intact families, had God, and yet the civil rights legislation of the 1960s wrecked that. That is demonstrable, all you white liberals and radicals like Dr. Umar Johnson out there, okay? That is demonstrable.
You know you can get far more from what you're owed psychologically than you can ever get.
This is the way the argument's going to go, by the way. Okay. No, you're right. I'm not a slave, but I'm suffering the psychological effects of slavery. I'm making this video so everybody knows this is not a joke. Look around you. Up until 5 minutes ago, men couldn't be called women. And if you did call a man a woman, they take it to the loony bin. But now it's entertained as something we need to take seriously. Don't dismiss this argument, because they will make it in a court of law. They'll make it in front of a bunch of guilty white liberal judges who'll say, there are psychological damages. And that'll be the reason why somehow, some way, this guy's off his rocker. They're not going to get 25% of anything. But somehow, some way, they are going to extract money, because this guy's an extortionist. He's no different than Al Sharpton. He's no different than Jesse Jackson. He's no different than any of these black leaders who have made a lot of money, okay, in America, exploiting the race issue. But make no mistake about it, this is not to be dismissed lightly. That's why I'm making this video, so people understand. No, we need to fight against this. Let's keep going.
For 243 years of unpaid labor on the plantation. The psychological damage is what affects us the most. Every time you see a black man with a white woman, that's psychological.
What about if a black man really is attracted to that white woman? Okay. What about if a white man is really attracted to a black woman? I say that because I am married to a black woman. Is she less black, Dr. Johnson? Okay. Am I a racist? Is she a racist? How does this work? Tell me how this works. What psychological damage did my wife have when she decided that she wanted to marry me? Now, that's something that she might want to get psychoanalyzed for. Why would she want to marry me? But having nothing to do with the color of my skin. See, what guys like Dr. Johnson don't understand is that there are things that transcend race. But when everything in the world, when you see everything in the world through the prism of race, then you're enslaved. You have enslaved yourself, Dr. Johnson, because you can't think beyond that. You would make it seem like my wife is psychologically damaged because of slavery, and that's why she's married to me. Okay, that's not only wrong, but it's really, really insulting.
Damage. Every time you see a black woman with a blonde wig on her head, that's psychological damage.
Maybe she just likes the blonde wig. What about when a blonde white chick dyes her hair brunette, or braids her hair? Braids aren't even African. Braids are European. The Vikings were doing it. Okay. So, I don't get it. What if somebody just likes something, Dr. Johnson? Why is that psychological damage to you?
Every time you see a little black boy or girl playing with a white doll instead of a black doll.
What's the difference? Who cares? If we're supposed to have a colorblind society, so then what's the problem? So what if a child who has white skin is playing with a doll that's has dark skin or represents dark skin? What's wrong with that? What's the problem? I wouldn't have a problem with it, okay? But it seems like you do, and you're trying to suggest that little child somehow is psychologically damaged because of slavery. Let's keep going.
That's psychological damage. When you see a black man take the life of another black man.
No. And this is where guys like this just don't understand or don't want to understand. The problem, Dr. Johnson, and you're a psychologist, maybe you should think about this a lot. The problem is the breakdown of the black family. The problem is the lack of accountability in the black community, because the black liberal establishment has treated all these young men and women like they're animals. You and people like you have treated these people like they're animals. You have inflicted the psychological damage on them. You are the ones that told these young men, you can't control yourself. You can't control your sexual desires. Go out and do what you want. If your baby's born, screw it. And and hopefully you'll have sense enough to go down and have an abortion. That's what people like you have done to the black community. You're the ones who've taken God out of the black community, so that human life is valueless in Chicago. There ain't a white guy pulling the trigger in Chicago, Dr. Johnson. These black kids are killing other black kids because they don't have fathers. Because you don't want to address the real problem. Because if you were addressing the real problem, you'd have to say that the black community is responsible for many of its own ills. And that's due, by the way, yes, to people like you, to people like Jesse Jackson, to people like Al Sharpton, and the entire black liberal establishment that said a long time ago, All you ignorant black people in Newark and Chicago and Philadelphia, you need to listen to us enlightened black people, because we'll tell you how to live your lives. In the meantime, I remember when I was a kid, my father told me, and when I grew up in Newark, black family in America was intact. It was after 1964 and after 1965 that the downward spiral in the black community started to, or that's what they were experiencing. It's a causal relationship, Dr. Johnson. One is caused by the other. The civil rights legislation that was supposed to help black people has done nothing but hurt black people. But yeah, you want to talk about psychological damage of slavery. In the meantime, in America, you can't point to a slave, and you can't point to a slave owner. That's a stone cold fact, Dr. Johnson. I don't know if you traffic in facts at all, but let's keep going a little bit more.
Man, that psychological damage. America owes us more for the psychological Holocaust than she can ever owe for the labor.
Okay, let's get this straight, Dr. Johnson. I'm going to say it one more time. I ain't paying. I ain't paying. I will fight tooth and nail. I don't care how many names you call me. I don't care how much you get CNN and MSNBC to call me a racist. I don't really care. I always say on the show at the front line with Joe and Joe, I'm not interested in dying on many hills. I'll die on this hill. I'll die, because what you do is you perpetuate hatred. You perpetuate racism. You sow the seeds of resentment amongst people of goodwill, because they say, in a very matter-of-fact way, like I'm saying, I'm not paying. I'm not going to allow the politicians to take one thin dime of my tax dollar and give it to someone who was never a slave. I'm not doing it. And I think a lot of people, instead of kind of getting into all the arguments, and I know I did a little bit here, most of it emotional, but I think pretty spot on, pretty logical, okay? I'm not doing it. You're not going to guilt me into anything. I did nothing to you. Dr. King said, judge people by the content of their character. I didn't marry my wife because she's black. I married my wife because she's a Roman Catholic, aside from the fact that she's beautiful. But our common bond is our Catholicism, our faith in Jesus Christ. Can you absorb that in your head? Can you swish that around in your mind? You should be able to. You're a clinical psychologist. You're smarter than everybody in the room. So we need to all think about this. We need to all think about this, because at the end of the day, there are some very frustrating things that go on. There's a lot of them, and that's the reason why Joe and Joe even exist at the front line. Please follow us on YouTube at the front line with Joe and Joe, or Frontline TV, and on Twitter @with Joe and Joe, @with Joe and Joe. But we need to speak out more against guys like this. He's a charlatan. He dresses himself up in some sort of, with his PhDs on the wall in psychology and everything else, and tries to tell us all what's wrong with us. What's wrong with you and people like you is you've enslaved your own people, because you have taught them that they need to listen to the black liberal establishment and do everything that the black liberal Uncle Tom establishment tells them to do. That's the bottom line. And that's enough of my rant for today. We'll see you next time.